Sure.
Hey everyone, if I can have your attention, please. Good afternoon. I'm Darrell Newton, Academic Affairs. As usual, very tired and overworked, like everybody is. Okay? Good afternoon, welcome to Faculty Forum. Today I have the pleasure of introducing Dr. April. We just called her April. You got it. From our psych department, presenting Perks and Perils of Mentoring Undergraduate Scholars. She comes to us, joined the psychology department, I should say, here at Eau Claire in 2003 after earning a bachelor's degree from UW-Madison and a PhD in psychology from the University of Texas at Austin, two great schools, by the way, with a minor in quantitative methods. She spent 2 years at Vanderbilt University as a research associate. Here at Eau Claire, April teaches research methods, personality psychology, evolutionary psychology, behavioral genetics, and senior seminar. She also runs the Individual Differences in Evolutionary Psychology Lab, also known as IDEP, mentoring 8 to 12 students a year and overseeing several studies each semester. Most notably, she's been awarded top honors such as Eau Claire's Excellence in Teaching Award and the Excellence in Mentoring in Research, Scholarship, and Creative Activity Award. In 2017, she was Eau Claire's nominee for UW System Board of Regents Teaching Excellent Award. Here to explain the perks and perils of mentoring undergraduate scholars is our esteemed colleague, Dr. April.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks. So, well, thanks for coming. And I think maybe half of us or more are from psychology. And I wonder actually if is that a sign? Because I said, David, I'm your next door neighbor. You already know what I do. And he said, no, I really don't know what you do. And I don't think that we talk enough on campus about mentoring and share our ideas about mentoring. So hopefully this is one avenue that can keep that conversation going, or at least get it started in circles that it might not otherwise be going. So, well, I put this together, and I was kind of like on a timeline for getting a title for this talk. And so I was like, well, perks, and then perils, and perils kind of almost sounds like bad, and I didn't mean it to be that way. And I think as I got things going, I actually was more thinking about like tricks and treats of undergraduate mentoring. So let's take it from that approach, because I really think that's more what the title should be, tricks and treats. So I view mentoring as the combination, the best of both worlds, right? We have these elements of teaching and all the wonderful things we know about effective teaching. And then we have research, right, and trying to grow content knowledge and skill development at the same time. And mentoring is doing both of those things, right? You're doing hands-on teaching, you're doing direct instruction sometimes you're just watching from afar and just being a coach. And meanwhile, you're hopefully uncovering new truths about the world. So I think in an ideal world, good process is good product, right? Like we like to think that in teaching, if we're using effective methods for teaching, then we end up helping students learn, right? And if we are doing good process in terms of our research endeavors, we end up with good products, sometimes and hopefully publishable products. And then of course we can think about this in the mentoring world, right? That hopefully we can facilitate students' development, and at the same time, if we're doing it well, then maybe we are also leading to the kinds of publications and culmination experiences that would count as good products as mentors for our students. So I think what I came down to as I started thinking about this, Karen asked me to give this talk, I was like, well, what do I really want to focus on? Like, what do I think about as good process in mentoring? Like, I think good process means good product, however you want to think about what product you want. In the end, I came down to a lot of what I do seems to be focused on keeping students' intellectual and personal growth at the front and center. And I don't always, now I'll be the first to admit, I don't always do this, right? It takes intentional reminding. But I think a lot of the things that I've done in my lab that I've found to be most memorable and successful are those that keep the students at front and center. So I just kind of wanted to go through some, I don't know, what I've come across as I think important for a good process. So one is knowing yourself. Like, how can you do these things for your students until you have identified for yourself what is actually important? So I think about goals, and I've actually, every semester, I have a couple colleagues who know this, I'm constantly asking myself, like, what am I trying to do right now? Like, I've been here for 17 years. Like, I think my goals right now are pretty different from what they were when I was a first and second year faculty, frankly. And recognizing that about myself and where I'm at can help me be really honest with my students about what I can give them. So my limits might be, well, do I have 11 credits this semester of teaching, or do I have 17 credits? Do I have an overload? Do I have a new prep? How much time do I have to give to my students? And that may come down to, you and I both really like this topic. Given the time that we have to meet together, how far are we going to be able to go with this? Is there another project we should pursue in order to meet your goals? So that's where the student also comes in. What are their goals? And areas of expertise. I think that I think it's been helpful for me to consider what I'm really willing to invest in. So if I have a topic that requires a lot of new knowledge for me, then I need to be upfront with the student about whether I have the time to give to that or not. And it's a lot easier to invest, right, in something that you're truly interested in. I feel like it's easier to be an invested mentor if I'm invested in a project that I'm passionate about. Just like it's easier for the student to be invested when they're passionate about it. Any thoughts or comments as I raise that initial idea?
I have one.
Yeah.
Do you, as you're interacting with new students to come into your laboratory, who's driving the question? Is it you? I have this idea and I'm looking for students to come in and work with me on this. Or is
Yeah.
it students? Here's an idea I have, doctor.
Yeah. Yeah, this is where I really was thinking about my areas of expertise, because I think I used to worry when we would talk about, is the research student-driven or is it researcher-driven? I've always, especially when they're new to my lab, I have every year, our first meeting is spent, here are some of the projects that we have been doing and are ongoing. Here are a couple of ideas, sometimes 5 or 6, that have been percolating in my head over the last couple months. I'd really like to try something. I have this thought, right? And then I might have a couple things that there are a few projects in my lab that because somebody graduated, they got set aside. And we never did, say, the follow-up study that needed to be done. I'll put it all out on the marker board, and then I'll just ask students, do you see anything you're interested in? And students who were on projects, do you want to move? Do you want to do something else? Because sometimes they are ready to move on to a different project. But they always start with an inkling of me. And it might just be something like, I'm really curious about how men and women, I know that men swear more than women do, but I don't know how types of swear words are related to this. Like taboo language differs in its type. Like sexual words are very different from religious words and such and such. So it might just be like this general question, and then if students, if their interest is piqued, then they might hop on. I've had other students, like one of them, Michaela Gunsor, by the time she was a third year, she was driving. She was like, I really think the next study needs to be this. She was in the driver's seat. But the new ones rarely are. And I think for most of them, it's more comfortable that way, frankly. But of course, it always depends upon the student. Another thing that I have started to try to do more intentionally is to talk to students about their goals. And the reason is that, well, one, they might not actually have a clue about what their goals are. Like they might have a broader goal of going to graduate school or becoming a physician assistant. That's what they think of when they think of a goal. And I think, okay, here are the things that we could be working on in lab. Are you concerned about are you concerned about developing your autonomy? Are you concerned about your capacity to deal with obstacles? I had a student who came in this past semester and she said, I have been told that I'm really idealistic and I have simplistic views of how to solve the world's problems. I think I need a little down-to-earthing. And last week she told me out of a lab discussion that got pretty tense because there were dissenting viewpoints. That she was getting that grounding. Like she felt like she was getting forced to reconcile her relatively utopian views of healing the world with real statistics out of psychology and program evaluation. And she was like, that's what she was looking for. She was getting it, right? So I was kind of excited. And then there are others who have no idea, like, well, I guess I just need to understand how research is done, and then we can look at the specific skills that go into doing research. Is it the writing? Is it the statistical analysis? Is it generating hypotheses? Is it understanding the literature you're reading? Is it all of that? I bring them all like those types of ideas, and so that they can actually consider what do they want to work on. Some of them may have a goal of publishing. Some of them really want a publication. Some of them could care less. They're just looking for research experience. And then we have to consider that in the context of their development, where they're at, what I know about their writing skills, right? And also the type of project they're interested in. So I have one student right now who this past semester I said, I think that you're really passionate about the work you're doing. I want you to know that this is so exploratory. I don't see us getting a publication going on this for at least a year, maybe 2. I have a focused project that I think you would be great for, and I feel like you're a really good writer and it would be an awesome avenue for you. And she really liked that topic. And then she said, can I do both? And I said, well, of course, if you have the time, you know. And so that's what she's decided to do, but we had to have that explicit conversation because I knew, given her skill set and her goals, that getting a publication would be good. So anyway, it's also just important because sometimes when you talk about the students' goals, you realize that their goals are very different from your own goals. And they might be different from the goals you have for yourself, but they're also different from the goals you have for them. Because it made me realize, oh yeah, I have my ideas about what their goals should be, but that doesn't mean that their goals for themselves match what I think there should be. So it's fair to give them, right? I mean, they're their own person. We also discussed priorities, competing commitments, and expectations. And I think that the primary element here is paying attention. I think sometimes I'm better at this than at other times. Yesterday I had a student who, sorry, it was 2 days ago. It was yesterday that was the secondary conversation. But 2 days ago, she did not have a meeting with another student as planned. And I said, oh, that's a bummer you didn't get to do that. Well, we'll work with what we've got today. And she said, yeah, I'm sorry, family stuff kind of got in the way. And I said, oh, I know that you have, I know you have a younger brother that you spend a lot of time helping with. Is everything all right? And she said, she pulled back and she said, do you want to know this? Do you really want to know this? And I was like, yep. And so she spent a few minutes telling me what was going on. And then she said, I'm really sorry to hit you with that. And I was like, man, I needed that information. I needed to know. And the only route I had for trying to get in and being okay with asking her, like, is there more I need to know here about your competing priorities and commitments, was that she had a younger brother that she adored. And I'm glad I paid attention to that nugget because it was relevant to that little brother, right? And she could tell me more. So understanding their priorities and commitments is pretty helpful, and I've learned to try not to jump to conclusions that if they miss a meeting that it's like not invested in me. It's probably a competing commitment. So try not to get, I have had times where I've kind of like gotten upset and not said something right away, and that was bad, right? Like poor communication. Could have handled that better. So I've tried to be more upfront about having us have those conversations. Expectations. Karen Halfholm knows this story. I have tried to be better about communicating expectations because I've had events like, and here we might get into the perils of not realizing your own expectations until they're not followed. So for example, in my lab, I had a student a couple years ago who, like 3 weeks in a row, got up in the middle of the lab meeting, had their water bottle with them, were gone for like 5 minutes. Our lab meetings are, 50 minutes, 50 to 55 minutes, or maybe an hour. They would come back, like sometimes they came back with their water bottle filled up, sometimes they just came, one time they came back with food. And eventually, after 3 weeks of this, I called a student in my office and I was like, I feel like you just really don't care about this lab. I feel like you're not really invested in what we're doing. And the student just burst into tears and was like, what do you mean I love this? And I was like, I didn't think that you wanted to be coming back. We were having conversations about what were their plans for next semester, were they coming back? And to the student, it was just okay to get up in the middle of a meeting. That's just what you do. And I was like, I guess I have to be more clear about my expectations. Like, don't get up in the middle of my meeting. So we have the good thing, the silver lining is that this student and I have an awesome relationship now because I was honest with how I felt. Like, that observation of the behavior, that's all I had to go on. I thought you didn't care about what we were doing because you were getting up in the middle of our conversation. Fellow student was talking and you got up. And so it was increased awareness on the student's part, but also increased awareness on mine. And about an expectation that, of course, I felt kind of strongly, and not everybody shares that expectation. Some people don't care when students get up and fill their water bottle. I don't like it in the regular classroom either, actually, I've noticed. So I'll sometimes watch people. Okay, you can't wait. Anyway. Karen, does that remind you of is there any other expectation element that comes to your mind?
Well, don't you have lists in your lab about not only what you expect of the student, but what you expect of yourself?
Yeah.
I think that's an interesting aspect.
Yeah. And revisiting that list of like, if I'm being a good mentor, am I doing these things? Am I role modeling, being interested in their lives? Am I, being interested in others? Am I asking about them as much as they're asking about each other? And yeah, it's good to think about what you're expecting of yourself and what you're expecting of them. Oh, another thing that I've realized is really important for me is students working off of their laptops. I have a lab space where we have 2 big computer areas. And so we can sit in front of a big screen and work on a file together. And I've had students who will set up their laptop at the table, the gathering table, and the meeting will start. And they won't join the rest of us. They'll be sitting there at their laptop. And I have to say, come join us. We're in this together. We're collaborating on one screen. You have your the same file open on your laptop, but we are all doing this together. So sometimes I have to force teamwork because they're used to being able to hole in on their own little screen. I use assignments, timelines, and progress charts. These all take, this is kind of like a Saturday night, oh, we're in week 4. How are we going to plan out these next 8 weeks to get to this end goal? Right, so I know that this group has a goal of getting a manuscript submitted by the end of the semester. What's happening over the next 6-7 weeks? Lay out the tasks, and this would be, half of a meeting would be spent talking at least about the next couple 3 weeks, and who's doing what. So I had at one semester I had a sheet like this for each of the groups that was working with me, and we laid out stuff. And this is the type of thing that I keep on my chalkboard in my lab, and it just kind of has each project laid out and where they're at right now. Students like to be the one to mark off the X. But that's really useful. And then sometimes really specific assignments. So students in my lab have started to say, what should we have done for next week? Because after I do it a couple times, after I say, okay, for next week, here's what we need to do. Here's what I'll do. Here's what you'll do, right? And it's better to have a written record, obviously. But the more structured the assignments can be, I think sometimes the better, at least initially. And then they start doing it. I've mentioned before to some that I've had a wonderful experience a couple different years of walking into my lab and having this created by somebody else. So like a student who's been in my lab for a couple of years, they make it. And then everybody else is like, oh, this is a really great, wiser, pure model, right, of tracking progress. And it really just shows that we're a team. We've got multiple projects going on. We're lots of small teams working together, right, to do stuff for our lab. I try to have us do stuff together. The primary challenge or peril to this is that it takes a lot of time. This is Parker, a student this semester. He and I were working on some study materials for a project we're designing the study materials for, and we were just nitpicking word by word. And some people would say, you got barely anything done. And I would say, no, we got some really detailed stuff done today. And it's probably going to take 3 more meetings, but it'll be, he's super anal. He's probably more anal than I am. So it's good. Together we'll have materials that we're really happy with, and hopefully will not have any leaks or holes. But I think writing is one of those tough things. Lit searches, I think students, we often think, go off and do a lit search on this topic. There have been times where I've done that and then said, okay, well now let's do a lit search together, because then we can see how the way I do a lit search might be different from the avenues they pursued initially. Sketching out a study design, or, oh, it's poster time, circus coming up. Think about how you would lay out this poster. How would we lay out what we've done in this study? And then we can compare. I can ask 2 members of the project to lay it out, and then we come back and we plan it more detailed together. So in some ways I try to balance doing things together versus not doing everything together. So there are times where I have asked them to do something and then had to pull back and say, well, let's start over. One of the challenges of providing students ownership is sometimes they don't want it. I had a student last semester who I thought, because of prior research experience, she had 1 semester of research experience, that she was ready to give the IRB materials a go. Like, we have past IRB proposal materials. We have our study materials ready to go. I want you to go ahead and give it a shot. And if you have some problems, let me know and we can work them through together. But the next week when we met, nothing really was done. And I said, what's wrong? And they said they didn't feel confident. So we did a little bit more together, and then I said, now really, this is yours. Like, you can do this. I wouldn't ask you to do it if I didn't think you couldn't do it. Anyway, so students can be hard to read, I think. Any thoughts or comments to share in your experience with this? I have some students who they hesitate to ask questions, like they work very autonomously and they have to be given permission to ask questions. So it's almost like the other side of it.
I think that's, I think that one of the things that gets to is deference to authority.
Yeah.
And whether or not, even though you may give them and say, like, you can do this, they still defer to you.
Yeah.
Because they don't have that confidence how do you build confidence without giving them the opportunity to actually do that?
Right.
And so it's a, you know, chicken
Yeah.
and egg kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
I
Well,
don't
and it's
have an answer, but
well, and especially too when sometimes when we do things together, it's actually to make the point that, you know what, you can write sections of a manuscript together. It might mean that we only write 4 sentences or get half of an abstract done for a conference. We might only get half of that abstract done in an hour. And so they're seeing like this level of what it needs to be, right? But at the same time, I'm trying to demonstrate that even I've been writing conference abstracts for many years, will write a sentence, and then I'll be like, no, wait, go back, right? Let's try again. That doesn't sound right. We'll just nitpick. I want them to see that we edit as we go. Like, the first draft isn't perfect. But recognizing that there is all that like modifying and editing going on when we're together, I think raises the idea like, oh, if I do this, am I going to do it really wrong?
you have to be more explicit about that. Like, I mean, I know that you're modeling that behavior, but maybe
Everything I have to be more explicit
you have-
about.
I mean,
Yeah. Yeah.
the reason that we're doing this is so that
Yeah.
X, Y, and Z.
Yeah. No, you're spot on. If there's anything I've realized over the years, it's like the more I can be explicit about, the better. And the more I can tell them thank you. You know, like the other night, last week, so my lab group meeting is on Wednesday mornings at 7. And our lab group discussion got a little bit like contentious. There were disagreements. And I loved it. And I wrote them that evening and I said, I don't know about you guys, but I love it that you guys were able to hold a discussion with dissenting viewpoints about a hard topic, and you didn't get angry at each other, and you didn't leave disliking each other. You were listening to each other. And I had 2 students right away chime in like, yeah, I thought that was great, right? I have to remind myself that when I have a thought about what's going on in lab, to share it with them. Because it's like a student, right? If you're like worried about something you said in class and you're worried that you upset them, if you send them an email, say, I'm worried I said something, you know, they just respond. They just appreciate and I think that's making things explicit. So I wish I did it more and more. The primary peril is the time. We have formal weekly meeting times. The number one complaint I would say that I've heard from other students about labs, not psychology labs, obviously, is that they don't see their mentor very often. And so my students and I, we have a full lab meeting time, like I mentioned. This year it's at 7 a.m. Last semester it was on Sundays at 8 p.m., which they loved, and I didn't. Although sometimes we got to meet in the library on the 2nd floor, a wonderful gathering space. Sometimes we met at Caribou. But I didn't like it being in my weekend. But 7 a.m. is really hard for students. The small group meetings, I have realized that it's really important for me to not cancel. So like, if the group is involved in data collection, they'll say, do we need to meet this week? Yep. Because there are always things that we can talk about. We can talk about how data collection is going. We can be planning ahead. We can have a discussion. We can have an intellectual discussion. There are always things to talk about. So I very, very rarely will cancel a meeting, unless a student is sick, obviously. I don't want them to get into the slump, right, of missing things. There's getting off schedule. The full lab meeting time is huge for us. We have a reading group in our full lab. I have done this for years and years and years, that we pick 1 or 2 books every semester to read together. Right now my students and I are reading Saving Normal. And after that, we're going to read a book by Richard Wrangham called The Goodness Paradox. So kind of like a clinical science, and then another one in evolutionary psychology. And they get super into this. If there's one thing I've realized, the discussion, the opportunities for discussion and peer mentoring are huge in full lab discussions. So I have students who've come in, it's their first semester, and they'll say, oh, I thought I wouldn't be able to hold my own. And then I realized that I had stuff to contribute. because if the students build on what each other says, they feel like they're making a valuable contribution. Very different from a typical classroom environment where you have 30 students and one speaks up and the other one is just waiting to voice their opinion. It can be more really conversational, and I think they get a lot out of it. That full lab meeting time I also use to plan, to talk about, to practice things like, so I want to hear a 2-minute synopsis of what's going on with your research. I have learned, by the way, to not call on the novice researchers to do that first, because then I've interrupted and said, hold on, I think that I might go about describing this project a little bit differently. Let's give another group who's had to do this before a chance, you know, and then we'll revisit the other group. Because a 2-minute elevator speech takes practice. But it also helps students realize when they really understand what the research is about or not. And they might say, I totally understand what we're doing, I just can't say it. Then we know we need to practice, right? So I revisit that task. I also use this time to bring it, you know, sometimes I bring in breakfast and they just chat. I ask about, you know, what's something that's happened this week, so they start to get to know each other. So it's not always just intellectual discussion time, but also team development time. It's probably the #1 thing that I like the most about my lab, is they develop a team mentality. Peer mentoring opportunities are also big. You can kind of see in the background, that is that full lab. Having advanced students working with younger students can be, I am sure a lot of you have talked about this before. It doesn't always happen in mine because I have, at the beginning of the semester, like, here's what we have going on. I want you to hop onto a project that you're interested in, and you can hop on as many projects as you want. It often happens that my more advanced students will hop on 2 projects, which means they're more likely to have a younger student with them on at least one of them and can provide quite a bit of guidance in terms of just role modeling. Like, yep, when we get here at 10 o'clock, if April hasn't gotten here yet, we still open up the files, we still open up the documents, right? We're getting ready to go instead of just sitting around bantering. So they tend to be pretty good about mentoring each other. One of my previous students has asked me to be more explicit. Like, she has said, you need to designate leaders. You have students who are going to be leaders now. I'm leaving. This is Michaela. I learned a lot from this student who I had for 4 years recently. She's like, you need to designate your leaders. Tell them they're a leader. I was like, you're right, because they are. They have great leadership potential, and I should just be like, yes. So I have tried to do that as well, be explicit when I see them be good leaders. Providing a space to hang out. Huge. In fact, this is another thing that people have expressed concern to me. Dr. Carter over in biology said that his students are looking for somewhere to hang out. Their lab space is wet space. So they don't have a table with chairs or a comfortable couch, or we have a coffee maker and a fridge, some lamp light instead of overhead artificial light. So they come in and they have lunch, they come in and they study. So I have several students who this is like their second home, right? And we have a psychology student lounge just down the hall, but there's something about having a space that is theirs, and it's unique to being in this lab that I think makes them feel special. So you can see here the big monitor that we can sit around, right? It's super useful. Other things, sign them up for stuff they might not realize they want to do. That's the only way I can put it. I've signed them up for WISIS, I've signed them up for Quick Pitch, the Provost Honors Symposium, and they say, oh, I really didn't want to do that. But then afterward, they just loved it. They thought it was the best. The peril or the challenge here is that, well, when you do this, you're signing yourself up too, right, for a lot of preparation and practice and editing, and certainly worthwhile. What are you thinking, Karen? You have some thoughts?
I'm thinking that your perils are all about time.
Yes. They really are. Time and planning requires time. Yeah, we joke in my lab, oh, April's sending the Saturday night emails again. Because it's like Friday night or Saturday night that I'm like kind of relaxed and thinking, oh, we should totally do this. And then I send out the email. Sorry to bother you on Saturday night. I just wanted you to know. Take them to a discipline-specific conference. So I frequently take my students to the Association for Psychological Science. And I don't have anything against NCUR or anything like that. I just really like them to see it in the discipline because they're more likely to see speakers who they know. Up here is a picture. We went a few years ago to the Human Behavior and Evolution Society conference. It's been going international more often now, but the man in the middle there is my graduate advisor. So the students were super excited to meet David, and I always enjoy seeing him. So I think they really like those conferences. This is one of those areas where I think our apparel comes in handy. Right, we can have the lab represented. On a couple of occasions now, not often enough, 2016 was the last time we did it, and we're talking about doing it again this spring, is we have a research showcase, and this is where we have invited not just the provost, but we've invited family members and significant others and friends to come hear about the students' research. And this is fun. It's another one of those cases that requires more practice, but some of the parents really, really appreciate the opportunity to see what their kids are working on. So I like doing that. And then my students, one of their favorite things, I think, is to have end of semester gatherings. This often occurs at my house unless I really can't handle cleaning. Then we go to some place like Mogi's, but very frequently we have an end of semester gathering. Every semester, fall or spring, students will ask me by week 10, what are we doing for our end of semester gathering? So I kind of don't have an out anymore. And my husband usually does the cooking, and we play games. Students like to play games. It's fun. So I don't generally include alcohol. So if they want alcohol, they usually go out after. And they just know that that's how I operate. But I think other people will do whatever's comfortable for them. And then my last thought would be that, and again, this requires time and even planning, but checking in. One check-in I did yesterday with one of my students. Oh, I was worried that this was a separate discussion that had been happening during a meeting. I was wondering how you reacted to that discussion, and when you wanted to meet today, the student was really concerned about something that somebody had said to them in a classroom context, and they wanted my impression of how they were planning their career. And all I needed really to do was reassure them that following their passions is quite all right. But in the context of that discussion, I said, I was worried that when you wanted to meet today that you were unnerved by our discussion during our lab meeting. And they were like, oh no, I love that. And then we could have this conversation of, if there ever is anything, do you feel comfortable? Do you feel that you could tell me if you were uncomfortable, or if you were frustrated, or if you were upset? And they can let me know. So one of the challenges of asking them what you can do better, of course, is that they, in the ideal world, they're going to tell you lots of things. So then you know what you have to work on, I guess. So those are my thoughts. That's all I got. Any thoughts? Yeah.
I have a question. When it comes to gifts, impact practices and how they inform our pedagogy these days and curricular design, when you consider the area of research, one of the top three, of course, along with study product.
Yeah.
All right. How does that inform your approach to research with your students, or expectations of their research?
Well, there's the relationship with the students, and then there's the research experience. And to some degree they go hand in hand, but they're also separate. When students provide feedback after the fact, what they talk about is the expectations I held them to, the conversations we had in lab, me being there, just like, this space that they use, I frequent it. You know, I stop in. So, but as a high impact experience, I don't think, you know, we like to think that study abroad is high impact or engaging in undergraduate research. But I think everybody knows it kind of depends upon how it's going, whether it's a high impact experience or not, right? Or high positive impact anyway. Because I think it requires a close relationship. It doesn't have to be a close relationship, but there has to be some mentoring going on there. It's not just an advisee. I don't know if that answers your question. I don't think a lot explicitly about HIPS. I just think about what, you know, how can we meet what are our goals in this lab? What are our goals this semester? How can we meet those goals? And at the same time, how can the students, how can I make sure the students know that I have their development right at the forefront? It can't just be about me. Otherwise, I'm not going to be a good mentor. So, and I think that's high impact teaching too. So, other thoughts? David, do you feel like you have an idea now what I do in my lab?
If not, I know where to go.
Mike joined our reading group one semester. Did you have thoughts about that?
And then your research team.
Yeah, and the research team, yeah.
You know, I do have a question. You know, when we had the candidates for the executive director of ORSP come, a lot of the discussion was around reducing barriers to having undergraduates participate
Yeah.
in research, particularly undergrads from different or specific groups.
Yep.
I'm wondering how you go about the process of identifying students for your lab,
Yeah.
and then selecting them.
Yeah.
Is it, just can you speak
Yeah,
to that?
yeah. Well, sometimes some of the conversation, like I mentioned, us having a relatively controversial conversation, or not controversial, but contentious conversation the other day, part of it is because I have several diverse students in the lab, and we were talking about an issue related to social work and whether education puts people at a disadvantage, and this is why there are all these, you know, these groups that don't have this or that. And one student from a diverse, one student of color said, well, you have these people coming in and they don't necessarily want to understand you. They just want you to live the life that they've led because they think they've led the good life. So they want to show you how to do that. And it was a really pointed, right, like argument that this could be happening. But there's also the element of diversity in there, right? And the students handled it, they handled it beautifully. Everybody chimed in and said, yeah, I can see that point, and blah, blah, blah. And, but so I have diverse students, and many of my diverse students come from McNair. I have 2 McNair students right now. And usually I'm nominating them. Usually I have them in research methods, and I'm kind of just paying attention. And it may seem weird, but psychology is dominated by women. So if I have a male student who shows interest and I personally think conscientiousness is really important in psychology. You have to tend to so many details. If they show me a bit of conscientiousness and they're excited about the material, I often try to pull them in. So that may sound kind of weird because I think we're often concerned about women. I don't have a lack of women. I look for more men in the lab. So, but I often, I've had students who came into my lab as first-year students through Blue Gold. Otherwise I end up having them after having them in a class, just because I know them. And I think I have a lot of students coming my way, so I have to figure out how to be selective. So, other thoughts? Thanks for coming. Good to meet you, Roxanne.
So I hope everybody realizes that April won a national award as a mentor. Is this? I know you've been invited to speak at the Kerr conference this summer. Is this a preview of your?
I don't know. I think they want me to talk about like developing a mentoring award.
Oh.
Yeah. And I was like, oh, I don't know if I know the process we went through very well. So,
We can talk.
yeah, yeah. So, hopefully it'll be good. Thanks for coming.
I have a
Okay, you better get to it. Thanks.